At the beginning of 2025, I decided to do something I hadn't done in a very long time. Clean out my closet. What I found in my closet sent me down a joyous path of nostalgia and rediscovery. What I found has reignited an old passion of mine while introducing me to a new way to experience a hobby that I love. I found 4 Game Boy games: Kirby, Nightmare in Dreamland, Metroid Fusion, Super Mario Land 2, 6 Golden Rings, and Pokémon Crystal. These games are significant for 2 reasons. The first being that I kept them all. I have always treated my physical video games more like currency, trading them away in order to fund my purchase of whatever new shiny thing was next. Yet I kept these games, for reasons I didn't totally understand, until I replayed them all. Then the memories of playing these games started coming back. I, like many, am a younger brother. As a result of my status as a middle child, a lot of my early tastes in media were shaped by whatever television my siblings were willing to watch and what video games they were willing to play. I'll be talking about games more than television, so we'll have to discuss what media my sister introduced me to another time. For now, we will be focusing on how my brother introduced me to video games. It was the early 2000s. My primary form of entertainment was either Power Rangers, action figures, or Beyblades, until we wound up with a Game Boy. I have no memory of how we got our hands on one. My guess is a neighbor gave it to us. We had one game, Super Mario Land 2, 6 Golden Coins, the very same copy that I found in my closet at the beginning of the year. A game that still works in spite of being over 30 years old and having orange juice spilled on it by me. And that Game Boy also got orange juice spilled on it and still worked. I don't know what happened to it at this point, but maybe it still works. The only other game I remember ever playing on that Game Boy is Pokemon Blue. We didn't own Pokemon Blue. I'm pretty sure we just borrowed it from a neighbor. I didn't spend much time with it either. My interest with Pokemon at the time came primarily from the cartoon, because I was still too young to be any good at video games. I spent most of my time with the Game Boy playing Super Mario Land, and I didn't beat Super Mario Land until I was in college. To this day, I have never played any of the first generation Pokemon games to completion. I, like many children playing video games, had a habit of constantly restarting a game to play the early levels as soon as a game got too difficult for me. I doubt I would have ever even suggested we play these games if it weren't for my brother, a trend that is consistent with the other closet treasures I found. I didn't know who Kirby was until my brother got his hands on a couple of copies of Kirby Nightmare in Dreamland. I didn't play Pokemon Crystal until I had my own Game Boy Advance, and even then I didn't buy it myself. My brother got us Gold and Crystal so that we might trade Pokemon to complete the Pokédex. To my recollection, I still have not beat Crystal. I would play until I didn't know what to do, and then get bored and start over. My point in bringing all this up is to say that for a very long time, I was just playing whatever video games my brother told me to. I would eventually begin to search for my own tastes, starting with Beyblade V-Force for the Game Boy Advance, followed by Shrek 2 and Pokemon Ruby. But I don't think I really took off on my own video game path until I saved up and bought myself a DS Lite and Pokemon Pearl. It was Pokemon Pearl that stuck in my mind as I commandeered my wife's Game Boy Advance SP to play those closet games. I had some time ago traded nearly all of my video game collection for who knows what frivolous purchase. But those closet games made me realize that I was missing something that modern video games couldn't give me. I thought that procuring a copy of Pokemon Pearl might give me exactly what I needed. So, after 100%ing Kirby Nightmare in Dreamland, barely defeating Samus X in Metroid Fusion, starting to play Pokemon Crystal before my wife took her Game Boy back, I looked up prices for used copies of old Pokemon games. I was disappointed to find that copies of the original Pearl and Diamond were selling for $70, a price I could not justify spending on a used, loose cartridge of Pokemon Pearl. Still, I persevered. I had a copy of Brilliant Diamond that I never beat. I thought it would be an acceptable substitute for that old DS game. I popped it in my Switch and started a new save. I won't recount my full playthrough. I had a good time. I spent over 100 hours running around the Sinnoh region. I even played through the post-game, something I never did with the original Pokemon Pearl. I completed the Sinnoh Pokedex and spent hours in the Grand Underground searching for Pokemon to complete the National Dex. I even did some shiny hunting and caught a shiny Sneasel and a shiny Snorunt. But even after all that time, something felt off. I felt more like I was checking things off a to-do list rather than embarking on a grand adventure with my party of adorable companions. So once again, I looked up prices for Pokemon Pearl, but this time I widened my search. I eventually found a copy for $30 and ordered it on the spot. I waited with great anticipation for the game to arrive. As soon as it came, I booted it up in my matte black DS Lite, not the one I owned as a kid, but one just like it, that I bought for about $50. Quick tip to anyone looking to replay some old handheld games, the most cost-effective way to do so, other than emulation, is to pick up a DS Lite or a DSi from your local used game store. They regularly show up for $50-ish, and could probably survive getting run over by a truck. I loaded up Pokemon Pearl and was immediately transported back to a simpler time by that excellent start screen. I remember always trying to push start in time for Palkia to be completely pink or completely black. This is not relevant to my experience replaying the game, but I just felt the need to share that little compulsion. I pushed start and began my journey to try and understand what I felt was missing for Brilliant Diamond. I love storytelling, in particular the many different modes of storytelling that humanity has developed over the centuries. I love the video game hobby because it is such a unique and boundless form of storytelling. For me, Pokemon Diamond and Pearl tell their story through the Pokemon you choose to bring with you on your journey. Yes, this is the case for all of the Pokemon games, but I think that the 4th generation of Pokemon does it in a special way. I don't feel like my character is the protagonist. I feel like my Pokemon are the ones taking me on an adventure. I think this is because of the storytelling done through Pearl's art design. The Pokemon of Sinnoh reflect the mythology of the region in a way that other generations don't. I think other generations have their own strengths, but the design of each of Sinnoh's Pokemon tell a story, all on their own, that I don't think other generations quite manage. I have, since the first time I ever played a Pokemon game, always chosen the Water-type starter. I can't say exactly why. It is probably some combination of liking the color blue and loving to swim. I personally find the Water starter designs to be really consistent across each game. Squirtle, Totodile, Mudkip, Piplup, and Duat are all adorable, and I love them. I mean, look at Piplup. They're an adorable little penguin. I named him Poppy the Piplup. I love the story that Piplup's evolutions tell. All of the Sinnoh starters are inspired by mythology from around the world. Empoleon takes inspiration from Poseidon. He begins as a chipper young lad, poorly equipped for the grand journey ahead. He looks like someone who's never even stepped foot beyond the tall grass on Route 201. His evolution, Prinplup, has always given me the impression of a squire or someone in training. His awkward head fins and dark blue color making me think of some sort of tunic that a warrior in training might wear. Finally, Empoleon is the regal embodiment of the sea, wearing a trident for a crown and sporting claws for battle. His sprite is one of my favorites of the series. He's as ready to summon the might of the ocean as he is to sit down at a fancy dinner. I'm not the first person to say this, and I won't be the last, but you can't beat these sprites. The jump from 2D to 3D was inevitable. Since the first time we booted up a Pokemon game and were greeted by a lovingly designed semi-static sprite, our minds have wondered what it would look like in real life. We just can't help but ask for more. Still, I think the game's lost something when they moved to 3D models. These sprites, while simple, are still so full of personality. I love the sprites for the Machop line. The way they all flex as they appear tells you exactly what they're all about, and their poses tell a story of the Pokemon growing more confident and earning the right to show off their strength. The same line in 3D loses all of that, as they strike a simple pose when on the field rather than flex. To be fair, it is getting better. From what we've seen of Legends ZA, the models are getting more and more expressive. After Piplup, our next party member isn't far away. I had a rather traumatic experience with the fighting type gym while playing Brilliant Diamond, and felt I needed a flying type on my team to prevent a repeat of that disaster. So I picked up the Sinnoh signature bird, Starly. A great change that the Gen 4 remakes made was giving the gym leaders Pokemon with better stats. It makes them feel a little more challenging and gives them more of a story. If they're gym leaders, they should be training their Pokemon to be the best they can be. During my playthrough of Shining Diamond, when I got to the fighting type gym and faced Maylene, she devastated my team with her Lucario. I wanted to be better prepared. From what I remember, when I played as a kid, I had more difficulty with the puzzle of the fighting gym than Maylene herself. I was most likely getting by with an over-leveled Piplup because I wasn't swapping to my other Pokemon ever. I found for this playthrough that as long as I hit every trainer and rotated my lead Pokemon every 5 or so levels, that I could keep up with the game's difficulty. Still, Maylene gave me a run for my money. That Lucario is a killer, but thanks to Scamp, we were able to get by. I named her Scamp, really just because I think Staraptor's little over-the-eye feather thing makes them look like a little scamp. A complaint I used to have with the Pokemon series is how often you get locked into using certain Pokemon. So often, I would find myself with a similar party to the people playing alongside me. In Pearl, the usual suspects were Starly, Buizel, and Wurmple. Returning to Pearl all these years later, I have a better understanding and appreciation of the game design. It wasn't that you're locked into those Pokemon. It's that the game wants you to go explore to find unique encounters. Spend some time smearing honey on trees, and you might find Apalm or Combi. Talk to the right NPC, and you might find out about Drifloon. Or maybe you just get lucky and encounter a rare Pokemon while wandering through the tall grass. It is a method of storytelling that I adore, and is unique to video games. I love when a story plays out through your interactions with the mechanics, or level design, rather than through a game's cutscenes. You could play through Pearl a dozen times, and depending on what paths you decide to wander down, wind up with completely unique teams of Pokemon. It still isn't a perfect system, though. I'd prefer if they gave you the Poke Radar earlier in the game. There are so many great Pokemon that are locked behind the endgame. Poke Radar or no Poke Radar, I still endeavored to give myself a unique experience to the one that lives in my memory. I decided to half plan my team and let the other half come to me through exploration. Piplup and Starly were predetermined, along with one other, but the third member of my team came on a whim. I don't tend to use many Ghost-type Pokemon, maybe because when I was a kid I was playing during the day more than at night. So when I stumbled across Misdreavus one evening, I thought this was the perfect time to try the Ghost-type out. She turned out to be one of the most valuable members of my team. She was a triple threat, with Ghost, Dark, and Electric-type moves. She would be key to my defeating the Elite Four. One of the other unplanned members of my team was Bonsly, and I named them Groot. I had filled the most important slots in my team, and I was hoping for a Pokemon I never really interacted with much before, ran into Bonsly, and thought I'd add the cute little guy to my team. I was familiar with the Pokemon, but never took the time to add one to my team before. Groot wasn't the most valuable member of the squad, but their hammer arm would come in handy as a solid finisher from time to time. The 5th and 6th members of my team came at the climax of Pearl's story mode. Once I finally had access to the Strength Egg Gym, I made my way to Wayward Cave for Gibble. Wayward Cave is a great example of Sinnoh's excellent level design. You wouldn't find it without going out and exploring the map. If you take the time to retrace your steps after acquiring new HMs, you'll be rewarded with new and interesting Pokémon. I didn't do nearly enough exploring when I played this game back in the day. I spent most of my time in the Grand Underground setting up traps for my friends. I didn't even know there were pseudo-legendaries. I really like the design of the pseudo-legendaries. In particular, how you earn their power. Garchomp is only available in the late game, and is out of the way of the beaten path. So you have to go track it down, and once you have it in your hands, you still have some work to do to get it up to a high enough level to be viable. It's a great way to get you invested in the story of your Pokemon. I named my Garchomp Rosie, after the cryptid that lives in my house. It demands recognition to sate its dark powers.
Rosie! I know, Rosie. Hello. You doing okay? You're just gonna be in a video, okay? Is that okay? I'll give you a treat. Okay, bye.
Party member number 6 is none other than Palkia, this game's box legendary. I love Palkia and Dialga's designs. I find them to be unique among the legendaries for their otherworldly look. They really give the player the impression that they are something ancient, that command powers beyond our understanding, so they should look a little alien, and unlike any animal that might exist in the real world. I remember being a little conflicted about using the legendaries when I was a kid. They feel like cheating. Even now I feel a bit of that conflict, but more for narrative reasons. I have trouble justifying the use of a literal god to smash someone's poor little Pikachu to dust. But I felt I needed to keep Palkia around as an homage to my first playthrough. That, and the Rapidash I was using for most of the game was underleveled, and I didn't feel like grinding anymore. So I just swapped it with Palkia. I even named it Pop-Tart, just like I did back in the day. I was obsessed with snacking on Pop-Tarts when I was in middle school, so naturally I named the God of Time after my favorite snack. With the team fully assembled, it was time to take on the Elite Four. All I had to do was make my way through Victory Road. I immediately had a reality check from the first trainer I encountered. I limped away from that battle with one Pokemon left standing. So I went to Route 210 to rob this couple of hundreds of thousands of dollars before taking on Victory Road again. It was still a challenge, but my team held up. I had great type coverage across all my Pokemon. If the opponent didn't require a specific type answer, then a Surf from Poppy or Earthquake from Rosie would sort them out. It felt good, getting through Victory Road with less difficulty than I remembered. I recall as a kid dreading Victory Road because I'd inevitably get lost and wind up wandering around the caves for hours. I made it through the challenge in record time, and with most of my team still standing. It was time to truly face the Elite Four and see how far my team had come. I was a little worried heading into the first fight. My team were all level 50 to 55, a little bit underleveled for the end of the game. My fears were exacerbated by the fact that I'd just finished Brilliant Diamond. Another change in that game is giving the Elite Four more dynamic strategies on top of improved stats for their Pokemon. Other than that fight with Maylene, I breezed through Brilliant Diamond with very little challenge, and thanks to XP share, I didn't have to grind for my Pokemon to all be in the 55 to 60 level range. Even with my Pokemon at that high level, the Elite Four were a surprising challenge. I had steamrolled every other trainer in the game and not broken a sweat. And then the Elite Four cut me down to size. My fears for the original Sinnoh Elite Four turned out to be valid, but my team pulled through. Scamp and Groot made quick work of Aaron and his Bug-type Pokemon. Poppy washed away Bertha's ground-type Pokemon and extinguished Flint's fire types. Lucian's psychic team gave me trouble, and I actually lost the first time. His team are all around the 60 level mark, so raw power wasn't enough to knock them out. I led with the wrong Pokemon the first time because I thought that he was dark type instead of psychic. This gave us Mr. Mime extra time to set up and buff his entire team's defense. I wound up having to reset because I just didn't have a good way to overcome those buffs. But the second time around, I led with Rosie, who crushed Mr. Mime in her jaws like yesterday's lunch. A feat the real Rosie is capable of as well. Yeah. After that, the rest of the team was manageable. It was time to face the champion. But before I get to my experience fighting Cynthia and Pearl, I want to backtrack and talk more about my time fighting the Elite Four in Brilliant Diamond. It took me a couple tries to beat the Elite Four in Brilliant Diamond. Or, more specifically, it took me a couple attempts to beat Cynthia. I had taken less care in selecting my Pokemon and their moves when playing Brilliant Diamond. It simply hadn't been necessary to pay much attention to my party's moves because of XP share. As I mentioned before, my team was vastly overleveled for 99% of the game. I didn't need to care about what moves my team had because they were so overleveled it didn't matter. It only mattered a little bit for the Elite Four, but I didn't need the same variety that I would need for Pearl. I had a Rapidash that soloed Aaron, Poppy hardly broke a sweat with Bertha and Flint, and I had a Weavile that was faster than every Pokemon on Lucian's team, so they barely even got off a move. My lack of move diversity only became an issue when I got to Cynthia, whose Pokemon all had higher levels than mine and had competitive movesets. I lost to Cynthia enough times that I decided to leave the Elite Four and reassess. I was aware that a lot of my Pokemon had too many moves of the same type. A better team would have Pokemon with a much wider variety of moves with different types. However, changing my team's moves would take a considerable time investment because my key fighters had a lot of HMs. HMs require hard-to-come-by resources to be changed, and I didn't want to grind for it. So, the conclusion I came to wasn't that I needed to change my party composition at all. The conclusion that I came to was that my Pokemon needed to level up more. So all I did was go back through the Elite Four again to get the levels I needed. By the time I got back to Cynthia, the Pokemon I needed to win were all at a high enough level that I could beat her. I think that's part of why I was unfulfilled by my playthrough of Brilliant Diamond. I was never made to interact with the game's core mechanics in any meaningful way. Now let's go back to my Pearl playthrough and talk about how I beat Cynthia there. I was very nervous about Cynthia. My team was vastly underleveled, and I knew I was going to be facing several behemoth Pokemon, including another Lucario that could easily wipe out most of my team. I was very much the underdog in this situation. I remembered being floored by her team as a kid. She had a mix of Pokemon I'd written off as useless, like Gastrodon, and Pokemon I'd never heard of, like Garchomp and Spiritomb. But this time, I did my homework. Boo, the Mismagus, could handle Spiritomb with a well-placed Shadow Ball, and negate Garchomp's Earthquakes with Levitation. Scamp could take out that Lucario with one good Brave Bird. Unfortunately, not everything went according to plan. For every Pokemon I fainted, she took one of mine, forcing me to change my plans. She had higher levels than me, so her Pokemon were faster and hit harder, but I had the type advantage. I made sure all of my Pokemon had as wide a variety of moves as possible. Poppy's Grass Knot especially came in handy, since so many of Cynthia's Pokemon are big ground and water types. Even with my advantages, it all came down to Roserade and Rosie. It was exhilarating. I didn't know I was going to win until the last pixel on Roserade's health bar disappeared. When Roserade fainted, I pumped my fist. I'd outsmarted the game. I didn't win because my Pokemon were so overleveled that they were invincible. I won because I learned the game's core mechanics well enough to be able to pivot my strategy as necessary. It was far more rewarding than my Brilliant Diamond playthrough, because I was forced to meet the game on its level, and the story that unfolded as a result was all the better for it. Instead of a story about me cruising around Sinnoh with an Empoleon that could wipe out gyms with a glance, I got a story of how my team of underdogs brought down one of the greatest Pokemon trainers of all time. When I beat Brilliant Diamond, I hardly used half my team. Even now, I can't remember who the other 3 Pokemon were that went to the Hall of Fame, but every single member of my team earned their place in Pearl's Hall of Fame. And I think it was because I didn't have XP share. To be clear, I don't think XP share is the sole problem with Pokemon since it's jumped to 3D. I also don't want it to sound like I think every single Pokemon post Black and White is bad. In fact, I think there's a lot to love about modern Pokemon. Legends Arceus introduced so many long-needed quality-of-life upgrades, like move swapping and an easier way to boost stats. I love the narrative potential of what Scarlet and Violet introduced by splitting the main storyline into 3 region-spanning adventures. Something I'd like to talk about eventually is my experience with Pokemon X and Omega Ruby, because those games are what brought me back to Pokemon after dropping off post-Pearl. What I do want to say is that there are fundamental issues with modern Pokemon, and the constant presence of XP share is a symptom of it. As I've mentioned before, I blew through Brilliant Diamond with the exception of 2 or 3 fights. A big part of that was how much experience I was receiving through XP share. I had a Skuntank that sat in my party for most of the game and rarely saw combat. Basically, I think the problem with modern Pokemon game design is that it focuses on quantity over quality. Instead of giving you opportunities to grow and play with the Pokemon you've chosen to add to your party, it gives you a checklist of all the legendary Pokemon you can catch at the end of the game. In Pearl, I took the extra time to find and raise Rosie up from a little Gibble to a Garchomp, and I was rewarded with being able to better handle the challenges at the end of the game. In Brilliant Diamond, I played a minigame in the Grand Underground until I had enough currency to walk into a room, see Mewtwo, and throw Pokeballs at it until I could add it to the box of fancy Pokemon that I won't ever interact with. I don't think Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl are bad games. I think they're great ports of 20-year-old games that are one of the most accessible ways to play Pokemon Diamond and Pearl right now. I also don't think the game design in modern Pokemon is bad either. It's just offering an experience that is so weighed down with the 1,000 Pokemon that now exist, that it can't create those unique experiences that I associate with the old games. That's why I went back to Pearl. I wanted to see for myself if the stories that I remembered from Pearl as a kid were still there. And I was delighted to find that they were. I'm not even done with the game. I'm still trying to build a team for the Battle Tower and catch every Pokemon the game has to find. My hope is to eventually find copies of Diamond and Platinum so I can have my own little Sinnoh environment to trade Pokemon and replay games. But I'll have to talk more about that later. For now, I want to go down a path that I missed the last time I was here. After I finished Pearl as a kid, I moved on to other types of games. My brother got me into playing Halo and Call of Duty, so I have a large gap in experience with the later parts of the DS's library. I wouldn't pick up a handheld system again until the summer after my freshman year of college, when I bought a 2DS with Pokemon X. So I missed out on Black and White, as well as Black and White 2. I've heard good things. Until next time, thanks for watching, and I hope you can find the time to reconnect with something that you thought was lost. Thanks again for watching. It has been so much fun revisiting this game. I've done it 3 times now, once to write the script, again in an emulator to capture footage, and a third time with a Japanese copy of Diamond. Every time has been a blast, and I'm glad I got to share this experience with you. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you want to experience the rest of this Pokemon journey with me. If you like audio dramas and science fiction, check out my podcast, The Fleet, or my other channel, Misfit Peacock Productions. You can find links for both in the description. Thanks again, and I hope you're doing okay.